All right. Well, speaking of products, story number one is about Microsoft. So
Yes.
Microsoft has a new Surface Studio PC that some are calling the Creative Dream. And people are saying that or Petapixel at least, is saying that it's taking direct aim at the iMac, which is what I'm recording this show on right now. And I think this computer, the Surface Studio PC, represents the first desktop computer that Microsoft has ever produced. So
Yes.
I know there's been millions of clones and, other manufacturers, HP, etc. But this one comes from Microsoft, and it's got the DNA of their Surface line, which is, a lot of people swear by. I've
Yeah.
never owned one, but the people that I know that have one say, they're very quick to compare it to anything Apple makes, on the Surface Pro, in particular the iPad Pro, which, quote, only runs iOS. The Surface Pro runs the full Microsoft Windows operating system and all that can do, which is pretty much everything. The Surface Studio PC shares the same DNA. It's got let me read this little blurb here. So the iMac with its 27-inch high-res screen and minimal design has been a favorite of many creatives. If not for their studio, then it's been a home computer. Microsoft's innovative, beautiful Surface Studio wants to change all that. It wants to kill the iMac. Fede, is the Surface Pro the death knell for the iMac?
So first we'll have to wait and see. I have to, full disclosure, I'm kind of like a little bit of an Apple fanboy. I grew up on Windows, and then when I made my switch, it was really hard to go back. I worked in IT for many years, and I still do. And I have things with Windows, like when Windows works properly, so a freshly installed version of Windows with minimal antivirus runs very well.
Yeah.
But over the years, there's like crud being accumulated on a Windows system that invariably makes the system become a little slower. I know the Windows people will hate me for that, but that tends to be my experience. So if you're willing to reinstall everything from time to time, then you can have an amazing experience. Also, the Adobe stuff looks and feels exactly the same both on Mac and PC, so there's no big difference. I'm not sure. What I think in this case, it's a really expensive computer for what it is. If you
What's
look
the
at,
price?
I think it's the base model, $3,000
Yeah, that is.
for Intel Core i5, which is not the fastest. The i7 is actually the fastest processor. 8 gigs of RAM and a 2 gigabyte graphic processor unit, the GPU.
Yeah.
I, I think to kill the iMac, you would have to win Apple users, and I don't know how many hardcore Apple users will switch to Windows like that. If you're not used to Windows, there are a few things that are complicated for Apple users. The fact that Windows was built many years ago, and each new iteration of Windows is basically a bunch of new layers on top of an old operating system. So it's like having a car that has like 7 million parts instead of just 100,000. So the
Yeah.
possibility of something going wrong, you need to be a little more of a geek, I think, to run Windows
But is that the
successfully.
case? See, that's the thing. I used to, full disclosure, I used to work at Apple, and like Apple products are, let's say, inextricably interwoven with my daily life. So even
Yeah.
if I decided I wanted to switch to Windows because they had a better product, it would be a very expensive and time-consuming switch, considering all my Macs and phones and Apple TV and all this stuff is all works together. And Apple keeps coming up with new stuff that make me want to stay in the ecosystem, including not just the hardware, but there's also Apple Music, right?
Yeah.
All these different things, even the podcast app. There are many other podcast apps out there. I'm using the Apple app on my devices because it syncs down to my playlists are also on my Apple TV, which is connected to my stereo system and all the rooms. So I
Yeah.
can all my playlists are the same for music and podcasts, etc. They're the same no matter what device I pick up. So the switching costs would be hard. So that said, I I've been kind of an outspoken critic of some of the things that Apple does. I would consider
Definitely.
I consider myself a consumer. I wouldn't put myself in the fanboy category. I love the tools, but I love what I'm doing and what they let me do more than I love the tool itself. Right? I mean, I like getting to a destination more than I like driving to the destination. So when I look at this Microsoft Surface through that lens, it makes me think of what I want on my existing computers. Now, this thing, I'm looking at the photos here. I'm showing the photos on the screen for those that are watching the video, but it's a touch screen. Obviously, it comes with a pen. You can lay it down. It's got a really smartly designed architecture where you can lay the tablet down almost at a 30-degree angle. It looks like, and write on it like one of those giant Wacom tablets, or
Yeah.
bring it up upright, and
Like
it'll
a
look,
Cintiq.
kind of like a Cintiq. Yeah, you bring it up
Yeah.
upright, it'll be more like a Mac. Apple, one of the stories we're going to talk about is going to be the new MacBook Pro with the Touch Bar, which I like, but I don't know. I don't know if on my computers, do I want a touchscreen or do I not? Half of me says you should be able to touch the things that you're looking at, right? Even if you don't do it all the time, I should, like the window I'm looking at you in right now, I should be able to just reach up and drag that to the left instead of looking for my mouse and then finding the cursor and then clicking on the menu bar and then dragging it over to where I want to go. How come I can't just reach up and touch and move that over? Even if I don't do it all the time, I should be able to do that. So
I think on this particular surface, it looks like the touch, it's easier because you can lay this thing flat. On a regular laptop, I think having the screen,
Yeah.
it's vertical. I think touch would be great to point at things, but doing selection or precision selection or things like that, it's something I struggle with on my iPad still.
Yeah.
Whenever I have to select text, I want to kill myself. And it's the reason why sometimes I revert back to a laptop. Aside from the typing, I type very slowly. I'm really bad at typing, but selecting text is never fun on touch devices.
Yeah.
I think if you do photo retouching at a certain level, then having a system with pen can be very interesting. My only critique is like because of the price, all my Windows buddies basically they are the kind of people that love to build custom systems, and then with less money than a Mac, they can build these crazy, 3D machines that do After Effects 10 times faster than a Mac. It's that kind of crowd. So this one looks more like a little underpowered for the money that you're going to spend. It doesn't look very upgradable, which is something that I think is great on Windows system. You can really open your desktop machine and change everything inside. And that's the thing that I kind of
Well, it's
regret
not for that
about
audience,
Apple.
though, right? There's never going to be one device to
Yeah.
rule them all. And if you need that you're that tinkerer that you want to get in there and you're a gamer and you want to overclock this thing and put water cooling and all that stuff in
Yeah.
there, this is probably not the device for you. But like Petapixel said, this is taking straight aim at the iMac and looking at this thing. It looks beautiful.
Beautiful,
Like,
yes.
Yeah, it looks beautiful. I just want that Apple logo on the back of it. Right? I mean, they've got this thing called the puck, the touch puck, which is very cool. You see that? You can put it on the screen and it gives you controls with the pen. It looks really smartly made, almost scarily so. Like this kind of stuff, Fede, looking at this video, these are the kind of things that we used to see out of keynotes at Apple all the time, right?
Yes.
Like Steve would get on stage and say, "Hey, here's the new iMac," and suddenly the one that's sitting on your desk looks like a dinosaur because you absolutely have to have this one. Microsoft has done something very similar to that with this, with the one caveat that it runs Windows, right? So I want this thing. I want it running Mac OS. It would be great, and it would need to be more powerful than the iMac that I have now, which is a beast. But this thing, it looks beautiful. It looks like you could put it in your living room and it'd be right at home, right?
It looks perfect. The thing is, like the question mark is, it's Windows for Mac people, or I mean, for Windows user, I don't see why not. I mean,
Yeah.
if you
Well,
already
if you can
are
afford
used
it.
to, if you can afford it, because there's that too. It's a really expensive system for what it is.
Yeah. But what about the other thing I want to talk about for this story before we leave it is it used to be back in the day that you have, if you were to switch operating systems, you would have to make compromises in terms of software availability. It's still that way on iOS versus Android because the different ecosystems and quality control, all that stuff. But even that's going away. The apps are gaining parity on iOS and Android. On the desktop, these laptop and desktop computers, it used to be that, well, if I want to do Office type stuff, I have to be on a Windows machine because it runs Office the best and yada, yada, yada. Most of the stuff, I can't remember, honestly, the last time I launched any Microsoft Office applications. And for that matter,
I do it every day before work.
Right. Yeah. Or for that matter, I can't remember when I've launched Pages or Numbers or anything like that either. Because most of the work that I do, for better or for worse, I know the privacy people are going to come out with pitchforks. Most of the work that I do, managing TWIP and proposals and all that stuff, is done in Google Docs.
Yes.
In fact, right now, our show notes are in a Google Doc spreadsheet. So we have all this stuff here, and a main reason for it is like what I was talking about before. It allows me to work wherever I am. The computer no longer really matters. I can be sitting at this computer on my iMac at the desk, or I can go grab my MacBook Pro and sit in front of the TV and bring up the exact same thing that I was working on. It becomes a portal, which I think was the holy grail back in the day. So looking at things through that lens, switching to a different computer, is the switching costs are less, but there's still switching costs.
Also, if you run Adobe software as a photographer, like your Lightroom subscription is going to work on Windows, your Photoshop subscription is going to work on Windows. Like the whole Adobe ecosystem is going to work both ways. So you could even have a Mac and a Windows machine and share your resources among the two. I guess it gets a little tricky, like if you have to do a little home network, like a few things. Sometimes having Mac and PCs talking to each other on the same network is not that easy. There's a few geeky things that you kind of have to face if you want to give a shot to this kind of stuff.
Well, I wonder, a related story that we put in the notes here is that Microsoft is offering to pay you to trade in your MacBook for a Surface Book.
Never.
Right? I mean, well, it's weird because I'm bittersweet on this. There's two sides of this coin. On the one side is, geez, the company actually has to fork over money to get people to use its product, But on the other side of it, it's like, wow, these guys, they're burning the ships here, right? They're going after Apple, and Apple, Apple, both of these are gigantic companies with more revenue than we could ever imagine, right? But clearly they're going after, Microsoft at least is going after Apple again, right? So back in the day, it was that whole Mac versus Windows. I'm a Mac, you're a PC. Remember the ad campaign against the white background?
And Windows won big time at one point, a long time ago. Apple became like a tiny company, and then because of the phone and the touch stuff, I
remember that keynote. You remember that keynote when Steve Jobs stood on stage and Bill Gates was on the big screen behind him, and it was the same time they had announced a $100 million loan that Microsoft gave Apple to keep them alive. And now look at this. It just goes to show, keep trying. If it looks like you're gonna fail, just keep trying, and the tides may turn. I don't know. This is crazy stuff. All right, Fede, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some more stuff regarding computers. Apple had an announcement where they announced a brand new feature on one of their computers.